Hello. Welcome back to Let's Talk Ray Bradbury, the show here on Let's Talk Entertainment, where going back to 2018, I've been attempting to read and review each of the roughly 600 short stories written by the late, great Ray Bradbury. Today we are up to story number 260, which is also the final story in his 2009 collection, We'll Always Have Paris. We're going to talk about that story today. That story is a literary encounter. And then at the end of the video, we're going to mention just briefly the final part of the book, which is in fact a poem. So I'm not going to give that video its own review, but we will talk about that just briefly. But the way that these reviews work is I do a brief synopsis of what happens in the story, and then I just try to wrap it up with some thoughts and feelings, really just a brief analysis of what happens, and is it a good story? Is it worth your time? What I took away from it? What is the central metaphor of the whole thing? So the story is about Charlie and Marie. They are a couple who've been married for about a year, and about a year in, she begins to notice something peculiar about his behavior. It begins one October evening. She was walking back from the grocery store. He was out walking their dog, and she sort of encounters him out in the wild, and he's just gushing about the weather and the evening and how great of a moment it is, and he suggests that perhaps he has the desire to travel, and she offers up some ideas about where to go, but he decides then that he'd really love to go home and have a huge feast. And so they go home and they begin to eat, and it's a big to-do, and it's that point where she realizes, or she notices, in fact, that he'd been reading a book. The book is Of Time and the Rivers by Thomas Wolfe. And then she doesn't quite think anything of it just then. But then the next night, he's acting a completely different way again. She goes in to his study, and it's sort of dark and smoky, and he's smoking, and he has a book on his lap, and he offers her a drink, and he's talking in a peculiar way, and at that point she notices that he's in fact reading The Maltese Falcon, so I guess he's acting like Sam Spade perhaps. Next, he's behaving very, very properly, and she finds out that he's reading Samuel Johnson's Life of Alexander Pope. At this point, she has an epiphany. She realizes that his mood has been greatly affected by whatever he's reading at the time, so she asks him, do you remember what you were reading when we were courting, when we were dating, and when we were engaged? And he doesn't remember. But she says, find out what that was and read that and nothing else forever. But she has an epiphany then, and she goes to the bookstore, and she gets about 10 books. And the next day, he comes down from bed for breakfast, and he's just gushing with compliments for her and just showing his love in the most, schlocky sort of romantic novel type of way. And she looks at him and says, Saroyan? Saroyn, the name of an author perhaps. And he says yes, and sort of smiles, and he sort of agrees not to read anything else. I had to look this guy up. I'm assuming he's referring to William Saroyan, an Armenian-American novelist, playwright, short story, and screenwriter who would have been contemporary to Bradbury's time, also lived in Fresno and wrote for Hollywood. So I think very much likely that their paths crossed at some point. But I would say that the story here probably works best if you know the author's mention. I am, in fact, familiar with The Maltese Falcon as well as Samuel Johnson's Life of Alexander Pope. I haven't read Thomas Wolfe's novel, though. But the story, I think, regardless of knowing who these authors are and what their work is like, I think it still works in a sense. Simply put, I love the concept. It's simple. A man's mood is affected by what he is reading. It affects his relationship with his wife, and then she in turn decides that you have to read certain things so I can live more happily with you. But the implication here is about the power of reading and the power of literature, and that it does have an importance, and it's not simply there for your entertainment. Good art has value. Good literature, perhaps, or rather, the experiences that we have sort of affect our behavior in the real world. Therefore, if you're reading bad literature with bad lessons, you could become a bad person, have a bad effect on you. More generally, I think it speaks to something that I think about a lot, which is the idea that bad art can be harmful. Not reading enough, not watching the right movies, enough good movies can be harmful, in fact, to the world. It means that you get lessons from other places, but it means you might be learning the wrong lessons, not learning lessons at all. I think most importantly, you dive into a good book and you see the harrowing situations that a character goes through, and you learn empathy for people. And I think that that's probably part of the problem we have today. There's a lot of bad art, and it's okay to enjoy good, a good popcorn flick, for example, or a good trashy novel once in a while. But at some point, you need to be digesting the good stuff and learning these lessons, and that affects the way we behave in our world at large. And I think that in a world where it's typically said that nobody reads anymore, I think it might explain some of our problems as a civilization right now. So, yeah, I think not one of Bradbury's best works, but I think the lesson here is important, and I think it's a good cap off to We'll Always Have Paris. So, I mentioned there was a poem at the end of the book. It's called America. It's not a great piece of verse, but it is about the differences in the way that Americans see our country versus the way immigrants longing to come here and be part of our civilization see our country. And it sort of suggests that we take it for granted, and others sort of see us have for many generations seen us as a shining example, a beacon on the hill, a city on the hill, rather. And I think it's a very important message right now because things are changing and not for the best. Regardless of what you think about immigration, in this period of American isolationism and sort of cracking down on illegal immigration, it speaks to the fact that we need to reform our processes for legal migration and to make opportunities for people, because people will continue to come illegally if their lives are in danger and there's no legal way for them to get here to save their own lives and to make their lives better and the lives of their families. So I think Bradbury, although that was 2009, I think it goes to show that here we are in 2025 and nothing's really changed. In fact, things have gotten worse, and I think that, for me at least, this mediocre poem has a good lesson that I think it's very important to hear right now. So there you are. All right, then. That was A Literary Encounter, the 21st of 22 chapters in We'll Always Have Paris from 2009. And again, the 260th Ray Bradbury review overall. So what next? I'm going to take a break. I will be back to Bradbury at some point. Not sure when. I have to do some research, find the next volume to pick up with the most stories that I haven't read to get the most bang for my buck. But I promise we're going to do this. We're going to finish this project someday. It's going to take many more years, perhaps. But eventually I will be able to say that I read and reviewed each of the roughly 600 short stories written by Ray Bradbury. And at that point, hopefully I'll be the one to finally create a definitive list of every story written by Ray Bradbury, because there is no such list at this point. There's a lot of lists of Bradbury stories that sort of profess to be complete, but however, if you look at one and you look at the other, there's differences, there's discrepancies, things missing. So clearly, no one's done this work yet, but I'm doing it for you here, very slowly on Let's Talk Ray Bradbury. Thank you, and I'll see you again soon.